I will start things off. I'll introduce myself. My name is Wyatt Tinder. I'm the Communications Director at NEWaukee. Thank you so much for joining us for Cooking 101 with Jennifer Bartolotta. This is a part of our Cloud Cafe, which is a multi-channel platform to connect Milwaukeeans online. I'm really excited to introduce Jennifer Bartolotta. Jennifer Bartolotta is president and founder of Bartolotta and Associates. Bartolotta and Associates helps companies transform connections between their associates and their clients, and she's also an accomplished keynote speaker. Previously, she was at the Bartolotta Restaurants as both the director of Carolotta, the charitable arm of the Bartolotta Restaurants, and as director of sales, where she was responsible for managing the Bartolotta sales team, who actively promote and sell the Bartolotta experience at their award-winning fine dining restaurants and managed properties. Jennifer is also the founder of Train to Gain, which partners with its clients to transform their technically savvy human capital into confident client-facing ambassadors for their brands. So I'm very excited to welcome Jennifer Bartolotta.
Good afternoon and welcome to my kitchen. We are going to do some basic things today. And we're also, everything that we do is going to build to a meal, which my family's going to have for lunch. So thank you for this opportunity. First things first, we are going to start with rice. I don't know your skill levels, so we're going to do some real basic things. Rice is pretty easy. Most people will tell you that the amount of water to rice ratio should be 2-to-1, but I've been playing with trying to stretch food. And so I have been doing 3-to-1 water to rice. And so I'm going to get my pot going. And as that's heating up, I put it into a hot pot. But as that's heating up, everything that we're going to do today is based on a generations old French culinary term, which is called mise en place. And mise en place means everything in its place. So my handy dandy camera person today is my niece Claire, who's living with me while Marquette is on physical hiatus. And she's going to kind of pan all the things that I've set up so that you can see that everything I'm going to need in order to be efficient doing this has been laid out for you. And as we go through and knead it, we'll show it to you. But she's just going to kind of show you how I've got this organized. And she'll end up over here with me with rice. So today I'm going to be using a short grain white rice. It's called arborio rice. And so that it'll be hard to see it white on white. But here, we'll put a couple there. So it's a shorter grain rice. We're going to put 2 cups because I'm feeding my family this meal. This would be the measurements I'm going to give you would feed about 8 people. So if you're 2, make double, and you half the recipe and make double of it, you could have 2 meals. So it's going to go 2 cups of rice. And instead, again, of 2-to-1, we're going to do 3-to-1. So I'm putting in here 6 cups of water. I am going to cover that until it boils, leaving just a little bit of a vent so that this doesn't boil over on me, but I can't guarantee you that that's not going to happen to me. So that's going to go in there. We're going to bring that to a boil, and then I will turn it down to a simmer. The reason I started with the rice is that it takes the longest of all of these things, and we want, when we're preparing a meal, we want to time things so that everything is done at about the same time. So we just simply work backwards in cooking. What's going to take the longest? And that's the thing that we start first with. Okay, so now we've got our rice going, and we're going to talk about some basic kitchen safety. I use a chef knife. This is, outside of my hands, the best tool that I think exists in the kitchen. If you're not familiar with it, I'm going to show you how to use it safely in the event that you have one and you want to try. So there are a couple ways to sharpen knives. There's a sharpening stone, super old school. There's a sharpening steel, which looks like this. And then there is the new age way, which is kind of a combination of a stone and a steel in one, and I've gone to this. I never could do this thing. Frustrated me. I didn't do it right, so I never learned to use on a steel. I did learn to use on a stone, and if you're going to do this, you want a flat surface underwater, and you want to gently, on an arc in about a 45-degree angle, kind of take the blade in an arc and you want to do the whole blade. I do 3 times on one side and I flip and do 3 times on the other. So that's how you would use a stone. The stone would be the least expensive way for you, or the least expensive mechanism for you to purchase to be able to sharpen your knives. So this is super easy. It's Wookdoff's product. I believe in promoting things that I know work or supporting local companies. So unlike other things that you might watch, my labels aren't covered, and I am going to mention the names so that you have those as resources. So this comes, it says coarse and fine. We want to start with the coarse, and you start with the back end of the blade and you pull it through on the coarse side. And I've already sharpened it, so it wouldn't take as much time to show you. I do it about 10 to 12 times, and then I go through on the fine side and I do the same. So now we have a sharpened knife. The most dangerous tool in your kitchen is going to be a knife that is not sharp. A sharper knife, if you cut yourself, is going to be much less damaging to you than a knife that's not sharp and dull. Just checking my rice real quick. Okay, so we talked about knives. I'm going to show you how to hold it in a minute. Let's talk about cutting boards. So this is a wooden cutting board. I have some things in my kitchen because I cook all the time that are meaningful to me and kind of like eye candy to me. This is a homemade cutting board. I got it from a company online, and I love my cutting board. I cut everything on here except fruits and meat. So all vegetables get cut on here, all herbs get cut on here. If I'm cutting nuts or I'm breaking down nuts, all that goes on here. Meat I use on plastic because I know I can sanitize it better, and fruit just gets its own special cutting board. So in order to be safe in the kitchen, there's some cauliflower remnants. In order to be safe with a cutting board and a knife, you need to put down a wet or a damp towel. Back in the day, I will own that I've had the opportunity to analyze some of my behaviors in the kitchen and my habits, and I had some that were really wasteful. And I've amended my ways, and I've gone to products that are not nearly so wasteful. So back in the day, I would have taken a paper towel, wet it, and put it down. This is a reusable paper towel that's been through my wash twice a week for 3 weeks now, and it's still held up. It's probably got a couple more washings in it. So if I put this down, and when I put the cutting board on it, it's not going to move as much as if I don't have the cutting board under it. It's going to move all over. So wet towel goes down, cutting board goes down. And then I am going to begin cutting. So the first recipe that you have is for the cauliflower. So here's a head of cauliflower. I'll take a second to talk to you about what makes me feel safe and comfortable right now in the world that we're living in. When I buy groceries, we quarantine them in this house for 72 hours at room temperature for things like produce. My rice is now boiling, so I'm just going to turn that down to a simmer, and I'm going to cover it a little bit more. So we quarantine for 72 hours in the coldest part of the house. Kind of back in the day, you would have had a root cellar. That's what makes me feel safe. I'm trying not to watch the news. I did early on read up about what was safe, but what makes me feel safe in my kitchen is to quarantine my food for 72 hours before I use it. So this was. In that process, you can see that there are some parts of it that started to go bad. But this surely doesn't mean that the whole thing is bad. There are parts of it that have gone south for sure, but we can trim those off, and the rest of this is still viable. So what I'm going to start doing is start trimming from the bottom. Now, this is super wobbly, right? If you're not used to cutting with a chef knife on a wobbly surface, I'm going to encourage you to use a smaller paring knife. And what you want to do is you want to hold the head with one hand, and we're going to trim, we're going to rotate the head, and we're just going to trim these leaves off. I would do this differently. And if you're used to cooking in the kitchen, go ahead. If you're new to sharp knives and you're new to working with things that don't have flat surfaces and are wobbly, then I would encourage you to stay with a smaller knife and pay close attention to what you're doing so that you don't end up hurting yourself. So you just keep rotating it around until you have all the leaves off of it. And then what you want to do is you want to lay it on its side, and we're going to cut this core out. So I want to get it the most stable I can before I go at it. So it's pretty stable right now, and I'm going to go down and I'm going to cut that core off. Now I've got a flat surface to work from. Before I start cutting these into individual florets, I'm going to get rid of the bits of it that have gone south. Now, on my website, I talk about a weekly garbage stock that we make. And normally I would save the green parts that I cut off, and I would put that into my vegetable garbage stock. But because it went a little south, and some of the green bits are a little soft, even mushy, I am going to discard those. I don't compost at my house. If you did, you could surely compost this. In this particular case, while it seems wasteful, it's not something I would recommend putting into your garbage stock. So I'm going to dispose of this. Wyatt, any questions?
No questions yet. To anyone who is in the chat, feel free to send your questions to Jen.
Okay, so what we're going to do now is I'm going to go back to the other knife just so you can see how they both work. And I'm going to just begin following the natural arms, if you will, of the cauliflower, and cut them into these individual florets. So you would keep doing this until you had them all off. One head of cabbage in this recipe, one head of cauliflower for this recipe would feed 4 people. So if you've got 4, go ahead and do it. And if you're only 2 or 1, go ahead and make a batch, and you could set this cauliflower aside for a different recipe. So then what we're going to do is we want to cut them into bite-sized pieces. I also believe in not spending more time in the kitchen than I have to. So we're going to cut them in pieces that will allow this to cook in about 20 to 25 minutes. So we want bite-sized pieces. I'm going to cut these in half. So this is what we're aiming for. Bite-sized pieces like that. So that would go on your sheet tray. I've used parchment paper. It's a bad habit from working in a commercial kitchen, and it's one of the habits that I've been analyzing. And I've decided that when my parchment paper is gone, I'm not going to use it anymore, and that will be one more thing that I'm not wasting. So we're going to continue cutting up the florets, putting them on a cookie sheet. This won't make too much.
Could you use a purple or yellow cauliflower for this recipe?
Purple cauliflower, yep. You could use yellow cauliflower. You could use Romanesco broccoli. You could even use broccoli. Thanks for the question. Cooking is about listening to yourself and what you like, and then it's also about what you have. So if you don't have cauliflower and you have one of the other things that Wyatt mentioned, use those. You could use broccoli with this easily. So now what we're prepping all the things to get ready to be seasoned to go in the oven. So the next thing that this recipe calls for is a red onion. So again, wobbly. If you're not familiar with this, what I would recommend if you want to start using a chef knife is to first cut the onion carefully in half, all the way through the root. Leave the whole peel on it and everything. Then you have a flat surface from which to work. Then you cut off both ends of the red onion. Now this, I will save for my garbage stock. And we keep reuse our bread bags. I cut slits in it with my chef knife. So you're not gonna be able to see the slits I cut in it, but literally like this. Take the knife and poke holes into it. That will allow the moisture to release from this, so your garbage, quote unquote, doesn't get moldy, and it can go into your stock on the weekend. So I save all of that, and that will go into our stock this weekend. Now I want a medium dice on this onion. So I don't want the pieces this big, that would be too much, but I want an appropriate amount of onion per bite of cauliflower. And so I will show you about the size dice that I would do with this. I'll also give you a disclaimer that I like really big, rich, bold flavors. I like food that's colorful, and I like a lot of texture. And so that's just kind of who I am as a cook. I don't do a lot of measuring. And I would encourage you, especially when you've got some time to play a little bit. So here's my red onion. I'm not gonna quite put all that in there, So probably 2 to 1, red onion to cauliflower. So I've got my red onion, I've got my cauliflower. The next thing that's gonna happen is I am going to put some olive oil on it. I just mentioned that I don't do a lot of measuring, so this is just years of being in the kitchen. So I don't know, I'd call that probably 2 tablespoons maybe of olive oil. Then we're gonna do, I use a rock sea salt in a grinder. I'm gonna do a couple of twists of my salt. And then on the cauliflower, I mentioned that I like to promote things that I love. So I love Penzeys, it's a local company, and I get all of my herbs and spices from them. I love their granulated garlic, so I'm gonna do pretty liberal amount of granulated garlic. And then I also love their curry now. It's slightly spicy, and I think it's delicious. So I'm gonna do a pretty liberal amount of the curry now on the cauliflower. And then I'm gonna take greatest tool that you have in the kitchen, which is your hands. And I am going to toss this. If you're uncomfortable doing this on the sheet tray, that's okay. All of this could have gone in a bowl first, and you could have tossed it in a bowl. And then when you're done, put it on the tray. I don't like cleaning, and I don't like washing pots. So I try to do as many one-pot wonders as I can. So thus the lazy man's way, and I do it all on one sheet. So that is I'm gonna pop that into an oven that I have preheated at 350. And I know that that's gonna take between 20 and 25 minutes. So that won't be done by the time we're done, but I have prepared ahead of time a batch so you can see what it's gonna look like when it's done. All right, the next thing that we're working on is the garbanzo beans. And I've got short little arms. I'll walk around like camera person.
How would you recommend storing that other half of the onion so it stays fresh?
So, great question. How would I store the rest of the onion? I store things in glass containers. So as an example, when we go to make the vinaigrette later, I save old jelly jars. So you could cut this onion up and it could go in the jelly jar and you save it that way. But I did purchase glass containers. I try not to use plastic. So I purchased glass containers and I stored it in that. Back in the day, when my behaviors were a little bit different, it would have gone into a Ziploc bag or plastic wrap that would have been disposed of, but I'm working really hard to be more conscious.
Could you repeat the name of the knife sharpener you were using?
Yes, it is Wusthof, and it's W-U-S-T-H-O-F. Let me deal with my dog problem. Sorry. Come on, guys. Come on, hey. Come on, everybody out. For sure, we don't have dogs in the restaurant. Okay, so back to beans. So I prefer the Eden brand of organic beans. I try to buy organic when I can. You can also cook your own beans, and certainly it's something I have time to do, but I had these already, so I'm using what I had. So I have taken the beans, I put them into, it's called a chinois. Hey, guys, sorry. It's called a chinois. Hilarious. They never do that. And, or a china cap. And I rinse them under cold water and allow them to drain. And then they're going to go right on the cookie sheet. So we have that. And then similar to the cauliflower, I am going to add similar amount of olive oil, probably about 2 tablespoons. I'm going to add some salt. And I'm going to add Penzeys Bold Taco Seasoning. Now, try to think flexibly. So if you don't like Mexican flavors and you wanted Indian flavors, you could do the curry now on the beans. You could do the taco on the cauliflower. All of this is interchangeable. So what I mentioned that I like big, bold flavors. So we're going to marry different flavors when we do this. So I'm going to marry Indian and Mexican flavors. They have a lot of raw materials in common anyway, and they go really well together. So a pretty liberal amount of the taco seasoning, my granulated garlic again, same process with your hands. You want to toss this around. And this also is going to go in the 350-degree oven. And what we're looking for here is a cooking principle that is dehydration. Whenever we dehydrate anything, or we take the moisture out of it, what we're doing is concentrating the flavor of it, and we are changing the texture of it. So this texture is smooth and it's soft. I like my mouth to like go crazy when I put food inside of it. So I like things that have texture, and I'm going to add texture to this and intensify the flavor by essentially dehydrating them. I don't know a lot of people who cook beans like this. It's something that I've been doing for a long time. I prefer them this way. So they're going to go in to the same oven. So 350 degrees. Hi, camera person. 350 degrees, and that they're going to take about 20 to 25 minutes for those skins to crisp up. So,
are there any someone's asking, are there any spices or like flavor pairings that you would recommend steering away from with the garbanzo beans?
No, any bean to me is kind of like chicken. I think they're one of the most versatile. If you're a vegetarian, they're as versatile as chicken is. They will pair with anything. Camera person, Claire, stay right there. I wanted to show quickly a book. I was first introduced to this book. It's called Culinary Artistry over 30 years ago when I was in cooking school. A fellow classmate gave this to me, and I've met the authors. They're wonderful people. But what's great about this book, if you want to invest in one cookbook, and no, I don't get a royalty for them. I have given it and recommended it to a lot of people. But if you want to invest in one book, this is the book I would recommend investing in. You flip through here, and let's say we picked scallops. So I'm on the scallops page, and on this page, it's going to tell you everything in the world that pairs well with scallops. So if you want to get creative with your cooking, I very rarely refer to this anymore. I just don't need to. But if you want to get creative with your cooking and you have scallops, take a look at this page, see what else you have, and just start combining things on your own. The biggest tip about cooking is that it's a balance of fats and acids. So you want to make sure that you're not too alkaline, you're not too fatty, heavy flavored in your mouth, and you're not too acidic, which is kind of a great entree for the last item that we're going to be cooking today. Not really cooking, we're making it. We're going to make a lime vinaigrette. So I save old jars. These are great. I make all of my own dressings. I have never purchased a bottle of salad dressing or a sauce. When you see how simple this is, I'm hoping that you will never will again either. So couple of things. This is a great tool. It's called a microplane grater. Wyatt, where are we on time?
We're at 25 minutes.
Perfect. That's called a microplane grater. And it is going to grate it very finely. So big, bold flavors. One way to get big, bold flavors is to use the peel of the citrus that you're going to be using in your sauces. Limes are typically harder than lemons. And what I do when I'm going to be juicing citrus fruit is that I put it on a flat surface, I hold it with the palm of my hand, and then I put as much pressure on it as I can, and I roll it a little bit. This breaks up the fibers in these citrus fruits. This one's particularly hard, and allows you to juice it more easily. Before you juice it, though, we're going to take all of the peel off of it. So we want all of the zest. So what I'm going to do is I'm literally going to take this and roll it around my microplane grater, and all of that zest is going to end up in our glass jar. Then we're going to juice it and take all of the juice from this lime. And once we figure out how much acid we have, I'm going to add the olive oil. I like things that are more acidic than alkaline, unless it's really naughty French food, and then all bets are off. But when I'm cooking, I prefer things that are slightly more acidic. So if you don't have a juicer at home, it's not a problem. You don't really need one. I'm going to cut this in half carefully. Remember, round things are rolly and dangerous with sharp knives, so you just have to keep your mind on what you're doing. Take a fork, put it in the middle of the citrus, start squeezing it and turning the fork, and that's going to release your juice. And it's okay if a little bit of pulp gets in there. It's probably add a little bit of texture actually. So all my juice is gonna go in here. The other way to do it is to use kitchen trick. Some people in the kitchen like to use tongs. It's not a method that I ever really perfected, but I'll generally show you. So I'm putting it close to the end and you can squeeze out the juice that way. I like my fork better. What I like best is the juicer, a little old school hand one that you just twist around, but I forgot to pull it out. So the benefit of mise en place. So there's your lime juice. Now I know how much acid I have. So I like 50-50. I want to match the amount of juice to my oil. So I'm going to eyeball it, and I'm going to look to bring that up to about double that amount, right about there. Then I'm going to put salt. Now remember, this has no seasoning in it. It looks like a lot, but we flavor things by layering them as we go. And then the last thing that's going to go in is garlic. So this is garlic from my garden last year. I'm coming down to my last bulbs, which makes me sad because I didn't plant it last fall. But this is garlic I grew myself. There's so satisfying to be able to get your own food right from your garden. So I take my microplane grater. I'm going to put that garlic, which I'm basically pulverizing it. As you can see it there, it becomes like a paste, and that's going to go in there. And this gets shooken up. So through the magic of kitchen, I'm going to pull out the items that I cooked before we got together and put this together as a meal for you.
Someone in the chat is asking, what would you say is a good quality olive oil?
Olive oil is absolutely a question of you get what you pay for. The more you spend, the better quality you're getting. There's also a huge market, unfortunately, where people are saying things are olive oil and they're not. So I tend to look for big national brands. Bragg's makes a good olive oil. Paul Newman makes a great olive oil. And then, so those are things that might be recognizable, but then anything that is organic. You know, these are some, they're absolutely more expensive. This one's a little bit less expensive, so I use this to cook with. The darker bottle is a little bit more expensive, so I use that to finish with. So the darker bottle I would have made a vinaigrette from, where I might cook from the taller bottle. Okay, let's put this all together for you. So I got a rice of disaster over here. My rice is not quite done, and that's okay. There's a corner of it that's done, and I'll show you that. So this took a little bit longer. I didn't have my eye on it, and I probably was cooking it too low. But you can see that it's become really creamy. There's all kinds of stuff you could do with this. So texture-wise, it's probably done. It's just that some of this water needs to cook off of it. So I'm going to go ahead and put it in this bowl. So you lay down a little bit of rice, or as much rice as you want. I'm a hands girl. Then I layer in my cauliflower with my red onions. I'm going to put in my crispy garbanzo beans. And if you can see, I don't know, Claire, if you can get closer, you can see that they've split and the skins have gotten crispy. Then we're going to shake up our vinaigrettes. And we're going to put a little bit of vinaigrette on here because that's going to brighten it all up. And then things you could garnish with. So I've got fresh chopped cilantro. I have raisins. That's typical with Indian cuisine. You could use golden raisins, or you could use regular raisins. You could use dates. We like cheese in this house, so I'm going to sprinkle a little bit of feta cheese. And then finally, in a dry skillet, I toasted some sesame seeds, and I'm going to put some sesame seeds on, which will give it a really nice nutty flavor without adding a lot more fat to it. So there you go. lunch in a half an hour. Any other questions, Wyatt?
What would you say is the difference when people are looking at olive oil, extra virgin versus virgin?
So, I like extra virgin. The extra virgin olive oil is the first press of olive oil, and so you're going to get the most olivey flavored oil. It's not to say that further pressings aren't good oil, but it's not going to be as intensely olivey flavored, if olivey is a word.
Mm-hmm. What would you say, I know you were talking about a sharp knife and the importance of a sharp knife. What is the danger with a dull knife?
That you get a more jagged cut, and a more jagged cut is, if you need stitches, much more difficult to sew up and to treat than a clean cut.
And then someone was saying you mentioned that the garlic that you were using was from your garden. How do you, any tips for keeping garlic fresh?
Yeah, so I'll just, this came out of my garden in June of last year. I trimmed the ends off of it, so you can see the root end here and you can see the top end here. So I trimmed both ends off of it and I let it sit on a cookie sheet until the outer layer became paper like this, and then it gets stored in my pantry in the kitchen. So it's a dark pantry in an open air basket, and it was left. And so this is the same thing you'd buy in the grocery store, but I got to grow this myself instead. I don't like buying garlic that's chopped up in an acidic water or liquid or in olive oil. It takes so little to do it yourself. And it, as I mentioned, there's nothing more satisfying to me than growing what I'm going to eat and work with.
And then for the dressing that that you made, the vinaigrette, how long can you store that? And do you keep it in the fridge, or where do you store it?
Great question. I do keep it in the fridge, and so depending on how many you're feeding, this will last easily another meal. Usually when I make this, because we use so many of these in my house, and I use a vinaigrette, typically vinaigrettes are for salads, people think, but it's also a great way to pull a meal together, particularly a vegetarian meal if you're working on one. So this will last in your fridge, I would say up to 2 weeks. What's going to happen is the olive oil will harden. It will congeal a little bit. So when you're going to use it, if it's been in the refrigerator for a while and the oil has hardened up on you a little bit, just bring it to room temperature. Please don't throw it in the microwave. Just grab it out, bring it to room temperature. If you forgot to pull it out, run it under hot water for a second or two, and it won't take that long for the olive oil kind of to come back to temp and you to be able to use it again. So 2 weeks in the fridge, that's probably as far out as I'd stretch it.
Awesome. I don't think we have any more questions. Thank you so much, Jennifer.
You're welcome. Thanks, everybody. I hope you enjoyed.
I'm hungry for lunch now.
Sorry you're not here, Wyatt.
I know. I want to eat it. Awesome.
Bye, everybody.
Well, thank you, everyone, for joining us. Thank you.